somebody. I may be on welfare, but I am somebody. I may be in jail, but I am somebody. I may be uneducated, but I am somebody. I am black, beautiful, proud. I must be respected. I must be protected. I am somebody. Right on.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Critical Conversations. I'm the Reverend Dr. Susan Smith. I'm the Director of the Office of Clergy and Leadership Resource Development, along with my assistant, my best bud, Reverend Marcus Tabb. And we thought that it would be a good way to open this critical conversation on hope. Now, I know that we had a conversation like last October, November on hope. But we did think that since there's a different crisis every day, it just seems like one more thing happens. I just read where the regime is threatening to kill Africans to get their minerals. I mean, it just, after a while, you just say, okay, how much? And so if ever there was a time for us to hold on to hope, it's now. It's now. And so Dr. Luther Smith, who is the author of that wonderful book, Hope is Here, we thought we would have him back because that book is wonderful. And I think everybody should get it. I think you should get it and give it to your friends and your family and everybody you think of. And if they don't like to read, maybe they can do an audiobook or something. Is it an audiobook yet? Is it Audible? Okay, we'll find out. But it is life-giving. The information in it is life-giving, and it's a treasure to have at this time in our lives. We are also expecting Congressman Jonathan Jackson, the son of the late Reverend Jesse Jackson. He's coming on momentarily, but he's going to talk about hope too. But we want people to understand that if ever there was a time there was to have hope, it would be now. And this is not the first time in our history that hope has been required, but it just feels different now because things that are being done, and I guess it's been done before, to dismantle the whole government. It's been done before, but I didn't live through that, and most of us did not live through that. So now this is our time to live through it, and it's hard. And so we're going to have this conversation, and we're going to talk about how to keep hope alive. And I want you to really think about how you are feeling, how you've been feeling. I know a lot of people are saying that they can't sleep at night, which you need to get your sleep. But it's difficult. And so we're going to be talking about hope and how to keep it alive in ourselves and in our communities, which is a fairly different. It's a difficult thing to do. So, Dr. Smith, thank you so much for being here. We like I said, we treasure the book. I treasure the book that you've written. And so I just wanted to start off with a question to you. You wrote in your book that hope is essential, regardless of circumstances. And you write, quote, discussions about hope result or come about as a result of being in a desolate pit or miry bog. You say, but hope is essential to living the ordinary days. So my first question is, do you think that too few of us live with hope as a common companion? And if we do, what do people need to do to change that?
Thank you for the invitation and for this time of being engaged, not only with you and the questions, but for those who are part of this time of gathering. As you know from the book, I speak about hope not just as optimism or wishfulness or desiring something that we need and we may not have, but hope is, I think, at its deepest level, so much more than that. It's a force of God. It is with us because God is with us. And if we understand that hope is here, rather than the sense in which hope is beyond the horizon or that hope is something we have to conjure up within ourselves, it shifts the way in which we begin to engage the reality that hope is here with us, more than just the concept, but the reality that hope is here with us. And when I am dealing with so many incoming matters that are challenging and some of which seem overwhelming, it is important for me to recognize certainly my own limitations, the way in which I do discerning about these matters, but also to take seriously what is here with me, for me, in attending not just to my fears, but also attending to my purpose. Uh, that's a whole different orientation for engaging, I think, that which is in some sense frightening and challenging and threatening. And it's how we do this, as I speak about in the book, also relies upon us taking seriously the kind of disciplines we incorporate in our own lives to be aware of how to do this.
What made you decide to write about hope? What happened in your life that made you say, I got to write this book because people don't get it? If that's, what made you?
It came from my father listening to a sermon from a preacher who concluded from 1 Corinthians 13, faith, hope, and love. And he concluded, in light of what's going on in our nation and in our world, it may be that the greatest of these is hope. And that started me on a search for what is the greatness of hope. I've never been interested in trying to talk about which is greater, but what is the greatness of hope? And it was that led me to be listening very closely to how we use the word hope, how we speak of how crucial it is to not only the day, but in the coming days. And I came forth with this insight for a deeper meaning of hope than just wishfulness or desire, to really see the very presence of hope and to understand what is the work of hope as a force, and what is hope calling me into? What is hope calling us into as the work of hope? And what are the implications for the transformations of my own life that are needed, as well as to recognize the kinds of gifts that I might bring to the work of hope?
What was going on in this country when your father heard the preacher preach that sermon? Do you know?
Well, there was so much. We had the Vietnam War going on. We had the ongoing struggle related to civil rights. Uh, we have all the issues that we have today related to crime, and wondering also how the current generations are going to be able to live creatively, especially as we see the children and the challenges they face, the kind of systemic issues that are in some way disrupting their capacity to really thrive, not just survive, but to thrive in this society. We see things locally, and we see things nationally, and we see things internationally that at times we just wonder, where is God in the midst of all of this? And where are we in the midst of all of this? And I would so often hear the phrase, man's inhumanity to man, the sense in which it seems as to many that life itself is driven by the forces of greed, by the forces of oppression, by the forces of a kind of evil that seems to be insensitive to life as a treasure. All of these things were occurring at the time. All of these things were occurring even before my time. And as you've just spoken, Dr. Smith, all of these things have continued and taken their distinctive turns in terms of where we are now in 2026.
It is amazing to me when I read stuff that was written 100 years ago, 150 years ago. The wording is exactly the same now as it was then, which tells me that in spite of these ups and downs in this country, we haven't gotten it yet. And I refer to the quote from James Baldwin that says, not everything you face can be changed, but not anything can be changed unless you face it. And it seems that we as a country, we as a nation are not facing it. We don't want to admit it. We prefer to live in the mythological America is great thing, and it is not. Why do you think? Why do you think we are so stubborn or so challenged by that? And how can hope help us get past that, if it can?
Well, as you remember, one of the chapters in the book focuses on prophetic remembering.
It's a great chapter.
How do we engage the past um, in a way that attends to the realities of the past and not just a fantasy about the past? What are the lessons from the past that are for us now? And the prophets were speaking to their day, certainly. The biblical prophets were speaking to their day as to what God wanted for us in terms of justice and compassion throughout the land and for all. And the prophets were speaking to our day. And unfortunately, while there can be, I think, a verbal commitment to the vision of the prophets, it's lacking in terms of the ways in which we are, I think, living out the message of the prophets. And it's not just people who are in some way failing to to really grasp what it means to take seriously in the Christian tradition, my tradition, that kind of heritage. There are too many Christian churches that will be reading about the prophets in their liturgies, but you cannot find any prophetic ministries coming out of the church. And it's difficult to understand how you embrace the prophets as foundational for your journey of faith, and at the same time, fail to attend to the message of the prophets in terms of justice and compassion. The prophets, in that message of justice and compassion, were calling us to the work of hope.
Do you think people can have hope if they are not aware of the past? You know, that whole concept of Sankofa, you look behind so that you know what you're going to do in front of you. There are so many young people. Let me back into this. Some years ago, I was at the Haley Farm during the Children's Defense Fund event, and they're the boomers, and then there were the millennials, and the millennials were furious. They were furious at the boomers. They said that we, the boomers, had left them, and there's some truth to that. I think that, you know, those who are doing that work did the work and got tired and just stopped, and then everybody thought everything was okay, but it's not, and it hasn't been. And so as they're going forward and they're sensing things that are not right, they're getting angry. And then you have kids that are younger than them who really have been totally disconnected by choice from the past. Because when you look back to the past, if you know it, you do have hope because they went through some stuff and they got through it. But if they haven't been trained or, you know, pushed to know who they are and all that, then you almost don't have a foundation. So in a time like this, when there's so many people who thought we have made it, when you have children and teenagers and young adults who said, you know, who would we say before, I don't want to listen to all this stuff. Now they got to listen to it, right? Because now they have to live it. What does hope look like in them?
I think we live a life that is more deficient than it need be when we find ourselves in some way evading the past or forgetting the past, dismissing the past. We then live as orphans from the past, and there is a dimension of us that is lost. That also, I think, for which there's some lingering desire to make this connection to those ancestors who in some way have contributed to how we are now. It's more than problem solving. It's partly that, but it's also the way in which we have some gratitude for the past, as well as wisdom that's in the past. And this is where we have to be very careful about who are the teachers regarding the past, and how have they, in some ways, constructed the past around their anxieties, their fears, the ways in which their interpretation of the past really just serves their purposes, perhaps of oppression and suffering, or creating some image of the country or some image of a local area that is not faithful to the reality that can be for us now. We were created to be time travelers. And that time traveling is both to the past as well as to the future. And if we fail to take that identity that is essential, I think, to live as people of faith, we will find ourselves perhaps doing some lovely things, but also being very deficient in what we are, in terms of what we are really capable of being and doing.
Do you think that, especially for African Americans and other minorities in this country, I mean, I think some of the minorities thought that with the things that are happening under this regime, that they were going to be exempt from it. They thought that the bad things are just going to happen to Black people, and as long as that was the case, they were okay. And now they're getting it too. But as far as African Americans, our history has been one of constant struggle. And that means that hope never has a chance. You cannot rest the hope. Does that make sense? It's fatigue. Is it correct to say that you get tired of being hopeful? And if we are getting tired, then how do we correct that so that we can pass the message on and the energy on to the people who come after us? So we do these spats of progress, and then we do it and we work hard, and then we're tired. We stop. But it has to go on. And I think what I'm wondering is, does the hope stop? Is it intermittent? Because it doesn't seem like it's contiguous. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yes. Well, I think struggle is the very nature of being human.
But Black
Rather
people,
than it being an imposition on us as if somehow we were created to not struggle. But there are some struggles that we experience as being so offensive and so against what is creative in life, that we bear a burden that we begin to wonder, how long must this persist, and can I carry it, and how do I go step by step? And this is where I think understanding the past can be helpful, because if I'm just looking at the present and myself and my shoulders and my capacities, uh, yes, the struggle is going to be perhaps too much for me. But if I take seriously what my ancestors have gone through in slavery, in the breaking up of families, in just wondering about having the essentials for a daily life, and having generation after generation after generation, not only experiencing this, but within the midst, many of them finding ways to live creatively, hopefully, and with an awareness of who God is that is different than the oppressive God that had been preached to them. It's this testimony that when we hear it from the past, when we know it from the past, it can embolden us, not only in terms of what we're doing, but I feel an obligation to those witnesses and how they have, in many ways, set an example. I feel an obligation to provide not only that which they perhaps did not live to see, but to provide for coming generations that are looking to us right now and wondering, what example do we have for them in terms of how we are addressing the ills that are facing us and that are awaiting them. When that happens, I shift from the idea of I'm struggling to the sense of calling and purpose and meaning. Because with a sense of meaning, I think we can confront anything, and the struggle can take us into suffering. The struggle can take us into sometimes situations of certain death. But what becomes most significant in terms of life itself is a kind of depth of meaning and purpose that isn't just that which drives us, it renews us and energizes us and gives us joy that goes beyond, for many, understanding.
I'm thinking that we have a lot of work in terms of teaching our children the history, our legacy, and it was filled with hope. At the Proctor Conference now, we're concentrating on doing things in terms of futuring Black lives and talking to the children. Mama Elaine Mosley says, in Kenya, that the question is, and how are the children? And the response should be, the children are well. But if the response is not, the children are well, then that tells us we have a lot to do because they have to be okay. But they're getting ready to get bumped upside the head with this awful stuff that we have lived with forever. And so how do you number one adjust your own level of, because I think our hope goes up and down. Is that safe to say? Oh, sometimes we're better, sometimes we're not so good. We've got to adjust our own levels of hope so that we can give the lessons of hope to the children. Do you agree with that, or how should we do that?
As you know, working with the term, I think our hopefulness goes up and down. But I think hope is consistently with us because God is consistently with us. It's a creative force with purpose, really endeavoring to have us to experience beloved community, not just in some distant future, but immediate experiences of beloved community. And as you know, I declare that hope is always traveling with love. Love and hope are companions. So to understand the depths of love and what love itself is about is crucial to understanding what hope is about, because any definition of hope that does not have love is going to be a failed definition of hope. Any definition of love that does not have hope is going to be a failed definition of hope. And when I talk about a deeper understanding of hope, I'm also talking about what is a deeper understanding of love. Certainly, it includes terminology like romance and things we embrace, beauty, wonderful, wonderful, all of that. But there's something also deeper about love that we, in some sense, speak, but we really don't get. For example, what does it mean to love one's enemies?
Mm.
What kind of love is that? What does it mean to love when you have not just suffered oppression, but you have suffered cruelty, and to not have one's heart set on the kind of revenge that basically makes one's life a servant to revenge rather than a servant to what the creative forces of life are seeking to take us to and to experience love. How is this God's love something that we declare, but and is for us, as Jesus is calling us to embody this love, and yet it's something that comes easier to speech than practice. And one of the ways in which I've noted this has been when I have preached sermons on forgiving enemies. I've had persons come up to me afterward and say, church people come up to me afterward and say,
I don't think I want to do that.
and older church persons coming up to me and saying, well, I'm not there yet. Like as if this is something that is optional. And it's not like I'm working on it. It's like I'm not eager to embrace this dimension of love in light of the kind of feelings I have toward people who are not only offensive to me, but who are threatening. And consequently, that's the kind of entrapment where we can find ourselves becoming prisoners to our need for revenge, becoming prisoners to our ills, becoming prisoners to the past. I mean, sometimes it's a matter of not being able to, in some way, deal with an offense that happened decades ago, but continues to haunt us. How do we have an understanding of love? And how is the church helping us to forgive? How is the church helping us to love enemies and not just making a declaration about forgive and love your enemies? And when I've led a conference with some 70 people in it, all focused on spiritual direction. And I said, how many of you have had instruction from your local church about loving enemies or forgiving? And out of this group of 70 people, only 2 raised their hand.
Wow. Wow.
This is instructive for
Wow.
us. And I would ask all of us who are in this gathering this night, how many of you have received guidance and instruction on how to forgive an enemy? Not that you should forgive an enemy, but how to forgive an enemy. And instruction and guidance on what it means to love an enemy. This is our work, and it's available to us, and it's one of the crucial disciplines, I think, for being part of the work of hope.
So if you don't love, you can't have hope. There's because you're saying that they're intertwined. It's so interesting that and you say in your book that the need for hope is as essential as the need for love. And I don't think people think about that. But that whole component of Christianity, I always say that Christianity is very difficult to handle. I think that we make it so simple. I'm saved, sanctified, and filled with the Holy Ghost. Okay, that ain't all. I mean, there's some work that we have to do. And so absolutely, actually, I was preaching on that whole forgiveness piece yesterday. And I was telling people, I was explaining how difficult it is. I'm only lifting this up because it's so good to know that love and hope are so intertwined. And so I said, Jesus demands that we do some things that are just distasteful. And so for that reason, many people ignore the words of the gospel. They just ignore, I'm not going to do it, or they'll read it and say, I'm not doing it. I said, but Jesus says you have to love your enemies, and that is not something that we want to do. So I said, so if, for instance, I was by myself and I saw somebody I really don't like get hit by a car. And I actually used somebody in office. I said, if I saw somebody who's in office now get hit by a car and there was nobody around, to help them, then I was there, then I would be obligated to help him or her. That makes you sick, but I said, and then I said, well, maybe I could negotiate with God. Well, do I have to do CPR book, or can I call 911? I mean, I don't know what it is, but there's something that is required of us. But when you put it in the context of hope being as essential as love, in other words, you can't even fully say you love the Christ if you don't follow what the Christ says to do. And so then if you can't do that, then you kind of minimize your capacity for having hope.
Yeah.
Really. I never thought of it like that.
Yeah. I've
Interesting.
done a lot of engagement with genocide issues. And as you know, in some sense, even reading about genocide can be traumatizing. But to talk to persons who have been involved with genocide and how many of them move on most creatively is in understanding that their own liberation, their own freedom relies upon their capacity to not be mired in bitterness and anger. It's fine to be angry about what happened, but it's another thing to have your life defined by that anger, have your life defined by the bitterness, such that you cannot accept that this offender is worthy of my heart's engagement in some serious way. And I'm just to convey something that I think is important to think about. I think we all also have within us that which we do not like.
Yeah.
And is offensive. How do I begin this process of forgiving myself, that part of me? And too often we think, well, what I have to do is I have to have a kind of self-exorcism and get it out of me. There's some things you don't get out of you because there's such an integral part of your life experience. So how do you relate to those dimensions of yourself that continue to, in some way, haunt you in a way in which your own life seems significantly restricted and narrow when there's so much more that you can be available to. That the heart was meant to certainly not only experience pain and suffering, but to not have it in some way imprison it with because of the pain and suffering. It's this kind of liberating role that I think we are called into, that Jesus called us into in terms of the possibilities of life, because without it, we will find ourselves in a constant uh, back and forth from the process of offense and response to the offense and response to the offense. And you know that there are countries in which people have been at one another for generations, hundreds of years. And if you were to ask them, what started this? Some of them don't even know. But what they do know is this person over here is my enemy. And I can deal with them without any kind of sense of emotion beyond anger, hatred, and revenge.
So, and I want to welcome Congressman Jonathan Jackson. How are you? It's good to have you here. Um, so,
Wonderful.
so when if you are able, and I know that that Reverend Jackson was able to do this because he fooled around. He had to talk to all kinds of people. I mean, he just had to. They didn't like him. A lot of them didn't like him, and they poked him out. But if you can get past the natural inclination to be mad at evil, just mad at evil, and get through it and say and do what you think Jesus wants you to do, what Jesus says to do, then you're saying that you open up a conduit within your own spirit to have the capacity to have hope despite all the crazy stuff that's going on. Is that I mean, is that what, like when the people invited Dylan Roof into their Bible study,
Mm-hmm.
you know, first of all, that was an act of grace because, they didn't know that boy. And he comes in and he participated in the class. And then when it was done, he shoots him up. How does that type of stuff that we have in this country, maybe in the world, but I'm just here in this country, how does that kind of stuff affect your capacity to even love, therefore to have hope?
Yeah. It there are many expressions of this from Howard Thurman that have been really influential in my own framing of this matter, where Thurman speaks about, I will discover through forgiveness my liberation, even if it means little or nothing to the person who has offended me.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm not attending to my liberation, I'm allowing the offender to keep me mired in the anger and the bitterness and really the diminishment of my own life. So if I want to think of this selfishly, I'm forgiving and loving for my sake as much as forgiving, because there are persons who don't want you to forgive them.
That's exactly right. Gives them an excuse to do what they're doing.
It's an excuse. They enjoy the kind of alienation that they have with you, and they want to sustain that. And there are persons that we need to forgive that are dead. And if we're waiting for the dead to come back
it ain't happening,
and give an apology or something else that provides us the capacity to forgive, wait on that and see if that happens. So if I understand that this kind of forgiveness, and this is the thing about love, it's taking us to something more than what has happened to me or what is happening to me. It's taking us to that larger purpose and that larger meaning. And where I'm trying to understand is, what is God calling us into in terms of beloved community that we don't arrive at without a dimension of this love that forgives, this love that embraces, this love that crosses identity boundaries. We don't get there without it. And if we do happen to move into beloved community and fail to sustain the practices that are essential to nourishing love, we will find ourselves simply in the cycles of destruction that we've always experienced.
So this is deep because it talks about being a Christian. Congressman Jackson, thank you again for coming in. Can we have the clip, Loretta, of the first one that we have for Reverend Jackson?
Because according to how things are supposed to work out in America, Reverend Jesse Jackson was born to be a nobody, and the politics of his circumstance had pre-selected him to die that way. Here's a man conceived in rejection, born into poverty, grew up in a segregated part of America that was habitualized by hatred, and reared in the arms of a nation that was so saturated with hypocrisy that it had the nerve to treat him upon birth like he was a criminal, when it had stolen his ancestors from Africa 400 years ago. I want you to understand what you're looking at. Reverend Jesse Jackson was too tall to hide, too poor to be included, too black to be respected, and the only thing that saved him was the fact that he was too bold and outspoken to be ignored.
Those were the words from Reverend Jackson's son, Jonathan, who is with us today. And I have to say, I keep calling you Reverend Jackson because you were preaching on that day. I just have to say it, but your words were so riveting and so powerful. And I'm grateful that you came to join us, even though I know you're walking through this valley of grief. But I wanted to ask you a question. Your father talked about hope. If I don't remember anything else in life, I'm gonna remember keep hope alive. I don't care, keep hope alive. I mean, and it just resonates, resonates in my spirit. And so you and your siblings grew up with your father using those words. How did he talk about hope to you guys in your family when he was dealing with all this craziness outside of himself? How did he convey and communicate the importance of hope to all of you?
Well, thank you so much. Just a bit of a backstory. I begged my father to not let me be on the program, and he told me that he wanted me to do his eulogy. It was about 3 years ago, and I said, Dad, please, I don't want to stand over you, and I don't have anything to say. He said, you'll be ready. And so that's the first time I've seen the program and the clip, so it brings tears to my eyes. I wouldn't wish it on anyone, but I was glad to do that. I've had the privilege of being with my father, and we've had dinner numerous times with Dr. Samuel DeWitt Proctor, with Reverend Howard Thurman, and these great people. And so I feel as if it was a blessing. This was poured into me, and it's my obligation to share it and pass it on, the continuity of our history and hope. I would think of in my conversations with my father, listening in with him and Dr. Howard Thurman. Dr. Herman always talked about freedom. And he said that which we have, which is non-negotiable and irreducible, people's essence, to be free. It's just a yearning of the spirit. I think my father, in his way, talked about hope, that eternal spring, that light that you see. And my father would also talk about a God factor. When his back was against the wall and there was no clear way out, that he would see a light, and he would summarize it saying a God factor. That even in these moments of stillness and quietness and seems to have insurmountable odds around you, he had an eternal belief that there was God. So I would translate that into the hope factor, that hope is when you see the light. Hope is when you see beyond your circumstances, to know that God is not through with us.
So God was central. I mean, that was how he kept it going, because God was central. As Dr. Smith was talking, he was talking about the love and forgiveness and all that stuff that you have to do. If you're a Christian, you really have to do the stuff that sucks. I mean, I'm just sorry. You just don't even want to do it.
I understand exactly what you're saying. I mean, and if you think about it any other way, it's like to extinguish the light is despair and darkness. That's the reason I'm such a tickler upon saying Reverend Martin Luther King and not simply Dr. Martin Luther King, because Reverend Martin Luther King's life makes no sense to me if you don't put God in it, if you don't put the Reverend, if you don't put a higher calling. Why would he do this in a selfish world? You know, he had children, a wife, and people have such short-term memories and have such ingratitude. Like, why would he do this unless he felt and had touched into that eternal spring, which is a God factor?
Yeah, that is. We don't want to talk about hope and God and the requirements of Christianity, but it is absolutely true. From watching your father and watching other leaders who have done the impossible, I think about Shirley Chisholm. I talked about this yesterday in my sermon about Shirley Chisholm going to visit George Wallace. You know, that little racist guy who, I mean, what? And her campaign went crazy. But I think I told her that's God in you, and God in you makes you do stuff that you are not thinking about doing. You ain't trying to do it. So then, she goes and she sits down, and and it had an effect on him. So then if I'm trying to tie in what you're saying, Dr. Smith, that gives you hope when you can see raw evil kind of melting in your presence when you're doing something that you don't want to do, but you're doing it because Jesus the Christ demands that you do it. Would you say that's fair, Dr. Smith?
Yeah, I think it does really relate to this matter of freedom. How do I exercise my freedom to live creatively rather than being imprisoned by the kinds of abuses and burdens and traumas which my life has? And I'm not speaking of that as something that's easy. It may be a process that takes over more than months, but years. But there's a difference between being involved in a process of renewal where you're working on this matter of forgiveness, when you're working on this matter, to not just even put it in a reactive phase. I'm working on love and being the most engaged and caring person I know to be, not only for others, but for myself, as well as to understand how this is given to me by God and for me as a Christian, that how Jesus has instructed us to be in terms of being fully available to God and not just fully available to our anguish that somehow or another has taken hold of us. This I think, is another way by which we can encourage the importance of forgiveness. And one of the ways in which the Amish, for example, dealt with the children being killed in the school was, and they couldn't understand how the parents were speaking about forgiveness and going to the wife of the man who had shot their children. And the woman said, this is like 200 years of teaching in our tradition that has shaped us for this moment. Was she in grief? Deep grief. Was she angry about it? Deep anger. But where her heart was turning was to that of love and forgiveness, because she knew that's where her future was, and that's what she needed to move into. This is our work. And if we're not attending to it, sometimes I wonder, Dr. Smith, I wonder if perhaps the church does not teach about this
Yeah, I think so.
because too many churches don't know how to teach it.
Right.
But okay, that being the case, it's not sufficient for then failing to work at understanding how do we do what, who can we bring where collectively we work on this matter of forgiveness? Because you can be sure, if you want to be sure of anything in the life of a congregation, everyone in the congregation is working on some aspect of forgiveness.
Yeah, that's true. I think that it's really significant too that you say many churches don't teach this stuff, because really, to be honest, the gospel is distasteful. It's powerful, but it's distasteful for human beings, right? The way we're wired, a lot of, the white Christian nationalists have rejected Jesus as Jesus is portrayed in images, but they've also rejected his theology, and they say that Jesus is too weak. They just say he's weak. All this love stuff they say and forgiveness, that means that you're weak. And they, that's a whole another clergy conversation. But in the Black church too, there's a lot of guys and a lot of women too, but a lot of guys, that whole turning your other cheek thing and love your neighbor, that is distasteful. And so many pastors, I would assume, ignore it. Let's just talk about something else. It's far easier to preach from the Pauline epistles than it is to preach the gospel, I think. So let's just avoid it. But when we're in a place like now, when this government is pulling the marrow out of our bones, then there isn't, it's almost like we don't have a choice. It's almost like we don't have a choice because they're working on their theology. William Augustus Jones said, how you see God, your theology affects how you see yourself, which is your anthropology, which affects how you see people, your sociology. And these people that are on top now see us as objects, right? But they see God as this warrior and the soldier. Jerry Falwell said, and Christian and Catherine Stewart's book, The Power of Worshipers, she said that Jerry Falwell said that God is a he-man. I can't forget that quote because they have pictures of him with a six-pack and he got these great big old muscles, and they need for him to be a macho man who was willing. They don't talk anything about love. They just want Jesus is a warrior and he'll take you out. I'm being dramatic about it, but that's pretty much what they're doing. And so that's how they see God. That's how they see God. And so if they see God as one who don't care anything about love, and God is one who says, he who gets you, you shall get him back, then we don't have a chance. But your dad was not like that, Jonathan. Your dad, excuse me, can I call you Congressman? I don't want to be disrespectful.
You call me Johnny, Jesse's son, Jesse's boy. I'm all the above. I take it.
Okay.
I've lived 60 years as Jesse's son. That works for me.
But your father, like Dr. King and like Shirley Chisholm and like, C.T. Vivian, they did not, they internalized this, it seems the difficult words of the gospel, which is why they were able to do so much. Would you agree with that? And that he teach you, my mama said, you better do what Jesus says. What kind of lessons did your dad teach you in terms of having the capacity to even receive his message of hope?
Well, one Christmas, he gave us the book Strength to Love. And that was a very profound book to read, to understand that to deal with this idea that love is weakness, that love is a power. And we always had a picture of Reverend Martin Luther King up in our house. We were toddlers. So the social justice and the social salvation and personal salvation, these were the two wings of the gospel that taking the ministry outside of the stained glass walls and into the street was the harmony that synthesized his life and his theology and his work. So be like, what kind of ministry is that? Well, you pray and then you can protest. You can pray, you can protest. And praying for us was being on your feet and marching, not on your knees, that it was actively doing something. My father would oftentimes tell me that Jesus did not say praise him.
Right.
Jesus said to follow him.
Follow.
And so it kind of takes away some of the superfluousness and kind of the foolishness, and the idolatry that you can recognize God's humanity, his divinity, and also what he had to deal with on an earthly basis. So I think if you put yourself in that position, that you realize you can't, and my father told me one time, he had a quote he used to quote sometimes, can't carpet the world, but you can put shoes on your feet. So when you take the personal responsibility, that's not his quote, it's a quote that had been out there for years. It's about taking the personal responsibility. I think people would naturally assume how much he was into personal responsibility. He was turning the lemon into lemonade, that he looked at overcoming his circumstances starts with taking your own personal responsibility. I was talking with him one time about jails and crime and 3 strikes and and what the society was doing. And he says to me, well, just because they build the jails doesn't mean we have to fill them up.
Come on.
I mean, so so he was always like bringing it back home.
Yeah.
Let's take this personal responsibility. Don't let the cynicism he saw as very corrosive. And so I think what Reverend Smith was also saying is that you are defeated in the end. And my father would also describe himself as a long distance runner. And if he weren't able to like shed new feathers and new skin and get rid of the old and the toxicity that it would have consumed him. So in order to keep in flight, you have to shed that. And yet oftentimes, because I can be petty, I haven't seen too many scriptures regarding forgiveness in the Bible. But he would tell me, Jonathan, if you ever see an eagle wrestling with a snake, it's the eagle's fault. Rise above it. Rise above it. Like don't go into the temptation of coming down. You've got wings, you can see, you can soar.
I love that.
And I think that's where his mind was consistently.
Dr. Smith, I would just like to express my appreciation to Representative Jackson for his closing prayer at the National Prayer Gathering last month. It was a prophetic word with the president standing right behind him that was direct and inspiring to me as I listened to something that was not compromised. I know you were choosing your words very carefully, but there was nothing compromising in the chosen words. And I thank you for that in terms of it being, I'm sure, just an integral part of who you are, but it's also the kind of prophetic word that one could easily find clergy dropping, considering the context that they were in, but you didn't do that. And I never anticipated I'd have this opportunity to thank you.
Well, thank you. Let me tell you the backstory behind that is I'm the co-chair of the National Prayer Breakfast. I'm not in-house leadership. I've not sought any leadership. I went to the prayer breakfast, and of course, it's very right-wing, very Southern Christian. And my father would get a tickle talking to some of these people growing up. We sing "What a Fellowship," and they sing the same song, but means two different things to us. And they asked me to be the co-chair, and I said, okay, I don't know what I'm doing up here in the Congress. I'll do it. And then before I knew it, they're like, yeah, well, the co-chair, the president's on the stage. I'm like, really? You mean I get to see the president once a year because we don't see him outside the State of the Union? I said, yeah, I'll wait for a whole year to tell him something for 3 minutes. I'd be glad to. So I go to the breakfast and all the other good stuff. And the Democrats, in large part, they don't come. And I'm like, this is a spiritual fight. This is a spiritual battle. I mean, you've got to be able to talk with each person on their terms. And I know we're playing inside baseball. It doesn't matter. I'm like, for the people on the outside, they see us not going to church. We look immoral and broke. We have to show up. So many of the leaders don't come to that prayer breakfast. But I was like, here I am, Lord, send me. So give me this opportunity to show my faith. And to the left of me was Mr. Bukele of El Salvador, who's got that torturous prison. And to the right was President Trump. I mean, two people that are leading the nation into world war and chaos. And I know heavy is the head that wears the crown. And I said, Lord, use me. Let me be an instrument, and I'll say it. And or she be cordial and congenial and convivial and then still speak truth to power. And the president's head is going to get heavier and heavier now as he goes into Iran. He's going to see the weight of war as he goes to Dover and Andrews Air Force Base to bring back dead children. And underestimating an opponent, he's going to feel that weight. And we're on the tip of World War III. So in some ways, I could see that tipping. And here we are. Now the whole world. Fertilizer comes through that Strait of Hormuz, LNG gas, petroleum products. They go into all these other goods. It's the source for India, China, and Japan. We're now in World War III. in this nascent area. We have to try to pull it back in. So I remember on that stage, Mr. Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, says, we're going to have peace through strength. So I told one of the president's advisors, I said, that's bad theology. I know he thinks he's saying something, barking and beating on his chest, but that's peace through coercion. You're supposed to have peace through conversion. So I talked with more about it. They said, "Oh, that's interesting that you would say that." So they don't even know the scriptures themselves. So we have to pick it up and teach them the power of the scriptures. They don't know. They may have big arenas and nice production, but shallow on the inside.
Yeah,
Even like I remember Reverend Hall telling me about wait on the Lord. Reverend Hall out of Philadelphia, one of my father's favorite ministers and his minister of his youth, and he says, "Wait, Jonathan, that's not as in standing still. That's as in being a waiter. You keep moving as you wait and serve the Lord." So the scriptures, they're so rich, and we have to teach those that don't know.
yeah. And there's a lot who don't know. And then I think as we're listening to Dr. Smith's breakdown and analysis of hope and what it contains and what's required for it, it's really important that people know the gospel. So I get irritated with people who call themselves Christian and they don't know what's in the Gospels. There's the Bible, it's the whole Bible, and there's Gospels, right? I mean, it's in there. And people who call themselves Christian don't know what Jesus said. So when I think it was Roger Moore, who was the president of the Southern Baptist Convention, he was talking with a group of white evangelical pastors, and he was quoting some words from the Sermon on the Mount that Jesus said in Matthew. And he said that the pastors interrupted him and said, "What are you talking about? You're just lifting up right wing or left wing talking points." And he was stunned. He was stunned. So yeah. So some people ain't gonna have no hope, right? If it is if it is required that you know the Gospels, if it's required that you know what Jesus said, number one, and then love Jesus enough to try to do what he said, then you will experience the difficulty of love, but also the power of love, which will then make a way for you to have hope in hard times, if I'm understanding. I'm really listening.
If I can add one thing into that, in politics, you have to weigh and measure each word, because you say duck and we're out hunting, everybody picks up a gun. You say duck and we're out golfing, everybody hits the ground, And so when people say, AI, I'm like, are we talking about artificial intelligence or authentic ignorance? I'm like, please clarify AI for me.
Boy, that's something. That's something. In your book, Dr. Smith, you said that forgetting is often an intentional way to misinterpret the past. And I'm wondering if you elaborate a little bit on that. And then Congressman Jackson, did your father ever mention the intentional forgetting of our people as Black people? Did he find that as he was doing his work? So first you, Dr. Smith, and then Congressman Jackson, please.
It becomes a way to live into a present that you want to construct and convince others about, so that in many ways you don't have to be dealing with the challenges of the past that are now with us in the present and are demanding attention because they did not get proper attention in the past itself. And if you are trying to avoid feeling guilty about how your ancestors have dealt with the past, are trying to avoid feeling guilty about how you are dealing with the present, are trying to avoid feeling guilty about how we are attending to the future in a creative way. If you're trying to avoid all of those things, what you do is you attend to the past in a way in which you remake it out of your own fears. You remake it out of your own sense of being right and righteous. You remake it in an image that for you is more tenable in the sense of one that makes sense for not placing upon you anything that leads you to feeling bad or you have to be apologetic for. And what disturbs me, speaking within the context of faith, is it sets a whole nation up to not be a nation that understands the power of an apology, and the power of confession. You know, we usually in many of our rituals we have confession at a very early part of a liturgy. And it's a way of clearing the decks that you don't have to have these matters that are in some way necessary for engagement to somehow be lingering. No, you can attend to them with an apology and a confession. And this is what we too often miss when we're talking about how to deal with conflict itself, because I've done mediation, mediating out of court cases, mediating in other situations, multi-faith mediation. It is so often people resist the notion of extending an apology to someone else, because for them, an apology means I am tainted. I am fully at fault. And it's a belittling in their way. And I think we can work with the concept of apology as a way that we understand it can liberate, and it can provide a whole different landscape by which we are in conversation with one another, and by which I can see myself as I am. I can see my ancestors as they were. I can stop putting energy into fabricating a past and in fabricating how we have interacted with one another. That I think is intended for us, and the truth shall set us free.
Mm. Jonathan, what do you say? How did your father ever mention intentional forgetting of our history as Black people, and how did it affect his whole relationship with hope?
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry about that. My power dropped. He would oftentimes he loved preaching from removing out the ancient landmarks, and the stones that were placed there that we've seen in America consistently is like erasure. So I would say it's the same thing, but the deliberate deletion, the distortion, the propagandizing. I mean, we see this within our own lifetime. I've seen the parts of my father's history and work that were erasure in my own life. It's in the last week, all these videos and all these clips. You think Reverend Jesse Jackson was something new. You wouldn't know that he had been on the battlefield for 60 years, and while he lived and breathed, that you would see this. So now, like, oh, I didn't know he said that. I mean, our children don't know he spoke at the Democratic Convention in '84 and '88. They don't know that was 20 years after Reverend Martin Luther King's death. You know, they don't see the unbroken continuity in our history. And so I'm just amazed that even for those that follow sports, all these great athletes have just been erased from like history. And I think it's maybe it's a power thing. And it's a very something unique in America. It's a superiority mindset where you show that we've had no accomplishments. So when you talk about why do we need an African American History Month, and Dr. Carnegie Woodson's words were he was looking forward to there not being a need for a Black History, Negro History Week and month. He wanted to make American history whole. And so because of this level of depth of racism, some people don't want to see America made whole by telling the truth, identifying everyone's contribution. We're going through a radical, wholesale eradication and erasure now. That's what DEI is doing. Who attacks the African American History Museum? Who tries to delete Jackie Robinson? Jackie Robinson was a great baseball player, but he becomes, an order of magnitude bigger when you look at the circumstances under which he played. When he was a rookie, he got hit with more wild pitches than all the other players in the league combined, you know. And he was chosen with Branch Rickey and others because he would have the maturity. And then Pete Hegseth wants to remove him from our history. I mean, so we're looking at this, it's erasure of history. And that is very sinful. So our children start off not at zero, they start off in the negative. They look at us negatively. They look at us as having not tried, having not worked, having not done enough. You know, it's embarrassing. I'm in someone's office at United Airlines. They were so kind to accommodate me. And so for that, I'm grateful. You know, but it's erasure. And I see it within our own community, and it's painful. You know, Reverend Jeremiah Wright and others, like, it's just erasure. And I think there's room enough under the sun. That's how my father would describe it. There's enough warmth and light under the whole sun. God made a universe that we don't have to like go through this. But remove not the ancient landmarks. Our children are too quick to throw away things and act as if nobody had to sacrifice. And that's why I would say in that part that was kind of poignant to me, recounting my father's story of Jackson as his third name. That's not my situation. I've grown up with my father my whole life. But the pain of that moment, almost like the Jewish community in the Seder dinner, you should taste something bitter so you never forget that. I think if there's something we can do as parents and grandparents, teach your children the bitter parts of your history. Show them the segregated neighborhood that you could not cross the street. Show them what you could not do. Show them with a black and white, I mean, not as a sense of bitterness, but of a sense of thankfulness to God in history. And that will make us whole and give us some roots. So someone asked me, like, I tell people, I come from the low end. My family was in the food line at the church. I've never wanted for food, but I'll never forget it. So I keep that pain with me, that those people in that line are, that's me.
Yeah, see, that's important. And again, if I go back to the whole goal of the Proctor Conference and futuring Black lives, I think making sure we tell our children our story. So, because once they hear them, nobody can take them away. You know, and some parents say, well, they don't want to know. You know, it's not. We're going to do it, and we can find creative ways to tell. But we absolutely have to tell the history because they will wipe us out. I remember in your book, Dr. Smith, how you said King Leopold, that chump. He erased. He said, what? How do you say it? He said he burned the state records of the Congo, and he said, "quote I will give them my Congo." That's the height of arrogance, just the height of arrogance. He said, they have no right to know what I did here. And that's what these people are saying now. Right before this came on, I was saying they better not go up in the Smithsonian and mess with our history. I'm just like cringing at that possibility, and the arrogance of it and all that. But we have an obligation, all of us, to tell, first of all, for us to learn our history, because many of us don't know it, and then tell the stories and be creative so that they are never, ever, ever erased. And we have I know. So as your father, Jonathan, did his work, I would imagine that he met that type of.
Let me tell you this here, just one, and I'm going to have to run. I got to take a connecting flight. But I thought growing up that every child had to sing "We Shall Overcome" every weekend. Okay, I thought growing up
Y'all had to do
it. I thought for spring break everybody had gone to Selma, you know, for the first week of March during like spring break. I thought everybody had gone to Washington, D.C. for a king's birthday. And even as the crowd went down and we were talking about having a king national, I just thought everybody had done that. And so many parents have not. My father took us to Haney Street, to Dime Street, to Nickeltown, where he grew up. I mean, so I think parents need to do, not just not just talk to your children. If you have some silver on your head or you are bald, the good Lord let you stay alive. Take your children there. Let them see the building. Spend that day. We've tried to sanitize this, anesthetize it, shield our children from the pain. I receive all that, but it doesn't help in the end. Last point I want to leave you with, I asked Dr. John O. Franklin one time, I said, what's a good time, a good age to teach your children about some of the things that you have experienced, you know, because in history. He says, Jonathan, don't hide it from them.
That's right.
He said, I almost got lynched at 6 years old.
Mm.
So that's the words I'd want parents to pick up. Don't hide the history from them. Take the opportunity in the music, in the sports, and whatever that the children are connecting to, and tell them the other part about the Black musicians that stood with Reverend Martin Luther King that got ostracized, about the Black athletes that had to pay a price like Kurt Flood, like the Black ministers that had their churches bombed. Like, tell them the story of what you know, of the white teachers that would not teach with you. When I took my grandmother to see Hidden Figures,
Mm.
she says, oh, yeah, Catherine. I said, you mean Dr. Johnson? She says, Catherine. I said, no, Grandma, I'm talking about the movie. She says, I know Catherine. We were neighbors in Newport News in like Virginia. She knew her. I found that incredulous. And after she saw the movie, she came back with one thing. She says, Jonathan, only thing they should do different, they should do the prequel to that movie. They should show that none of those ladies ever had a white teacher.
Mm. Come on now. Mm.
So that's the same neighborhood that Dr. Samuel DeWitt Proctor grew up in Virginia with my grandmother. So when he talks about the history of the community that he came out of, that's what my grandmother at 55 years old went back to get her GED in 1988. She had worked in the commissary and in the kitchen. In 1988, my grandmother, Gertrude Brown, my brother Jesse Jr., and myself, we all graduated in 1988 from college together.
Wow.
She graduated from Hampton. We graduated from North Carolina A&T. We left our graduation, went to her graduation. But that was the earnestness and the love that Black folks have. And that's the story that we have to keep on sharing, you know. And my grandmother, talking about the pain, she never told me until she was on her dying bed that she was orphaned. She didn't want us to have that stigma. You know, I didn't know why when we went to visit her, she always had the house smelled like bleach. She washed our sheets every day after work. And I was like, good grief. But she came from a depth of poverty. She didn't want her grandchildren to ever feel or smell, you know? So she just kept the house clean. She had little, but she kept it clean, you know? And so that's just a sense of pride. And so I come from a proud family like many other people, but tell the story. And I think my grandmother, my mother, my father, they always told us the story. Tell your children the truth, and that will make them stronger. I don't think our children know our stories.
My gosh. You know what? I know you have to go, but thank you so much. I could sit and talk with you for a very long time because
I love you all, and I need to learn more from you all.
So, but you have fed us, and I appreciate you taking the time and the sacrifice to spend some time with us. I feel richer because of what I've learned from you tonight. So thank you so much.
I feel next time I'm going to tune in and just listen. And a huge fan of Dr. Proctor. Love you all's work. You saying
Thank
something,
you so
Doc?
much. Take good care. Take good
Thank
care.
you.
Love you. Bye.
So, Dr. Smith, in the midst of chaos and dangerous political chaos, such as what we are having now, in your book, you talk about what the Lord requires of us, and you have already, you know, that first of all, we got to do what Jesus said to do. We got to love each other. That's number one. You know, that is a bitter pill for a lot of people to swallow, because we talk a lot, but we don't want to do love. So this is a good point that you brought up. But then you say we do justice by honoring the rights of others and by opposing those who oppress. And so if we honor the rights of others, even those who don't honor our rights, how do we feed the creation and the sustenance and the sustaining of hope?
Well, the conflicts, I think we can certainly characterize in terms of the political sense of opposing positions in a city or in a nation or internationally. But the question you just asked also relates to how do we deal with a conflict with another individual who's a member of our own family? And if we are unprepared, because when I speak about how hope is here, I'm talking also about how do we prepare ourselves for the very presence of hope so that we join the work of hope rather than simply want hope to somehow or another empower us by osmosis. With that, how do we take seriously that what Jesus was saying to his disciples was seek, ask, knock. It's all of this is part of preparation. Seek, ask, knock, engage. And if we're going to attend to these matters of being at odds with one another, how do we do it creatively? How how am I, Dr. Smith, I use the phrase, how do we befriend conflict
Yeah.
and not just run from conflict? How do we befriend it so that I'm available in conflict rather than dealing with my own anxieties about what someone is saying and I can't talk with this individual because they're too high or they're too low? How do I befriend conflict in a way that enables me to be present, to listen, to engage, and to do so without the necessity to necessarily even win this particular argument, but to sustain the conversation where I come from it with a clear sense of what this person is saying? Because so often as we hear one another, and in that whole section of the book where I talk about contemplative listening,
Yeah. Yeah.
we too often are not really listening to one another. We are hearing things about which we are rebuilding our retort. How am I going to come forth with a response that overwhelms what their response is, and I can convince them and persuade them to think otherwise? And I just think we lose the capacity to move forward more creatively when we run from conflict, or when we deal with conflict from a domineering way. That is, we're just trying to get everybody to follow. This happens in the church. I have this leadership role in the church. I have this title in the church. You need to do what I say and respect authority. But if you're dealing with conflict in those modes, there are people who begin to think, well, this is how we do this. So I need to rise to such a position where I can impose my will on everyone else, rather than recognizing that conflict can be creative and transformative, but that also relies upon our capacity to be more fully available to it and to understand the ways by which we can be more creative in engaging one another.
Oh, wow. Your book and what you shared tonight gives me much food for thought. What I'm gathering from this is that we have to work at hope. Just like you have to work at democracy, you have to work at things, you have to work at it. I think what I have felt is that we kind of just thought it was there, it's just the hope. We use it in a very I don't know, I want to say flippant. I don't know if that's the right adjective, but what you're talking about is it takes real work to have hope. And it takes wrestling with the gospels, and it takes wrestling with ourselves and all of that. And if ever we needed to do that, I'm going to repeat that it would be right through here. So we're almost at the end of our session. And every time I talk to you, Dr. Smith, I feel like I need to talk with you for 4 more hours, but we can't do all that today. So I just want to thank you for all that you have shared, and thank you for the book. Everybody who I keep mentioning the book. Every time I hold the book up at the screen, it doesn't really come out. But it's Hope is Here. Does that say Hope is Here? Spiritual Practices for Pursuing Justice and Beloved Community. It's one of the things that we were assigned to read, actually, when we were going through some staff training, and it kind of got me, and I think everybody should read it, especially in through here. And I think that you should, if you have time, go back and listen to some of this critical conversation, because it gives us some steps to do. I don't want us just to listen and say, okay, we listen. We need to do the work. And I think that Dr. Smith and Congressman Jackson have given us some things to think about and some things that we can begin to train ourselves to do. So I want to thank you for that. Now, when we're almost at the end, I'm gonna give you a tease about what's happening in April. And then when I'm done with that, I want you to stay on, all of you who are here, Sam, because we're gonna play a final clip of Dr. Jackson talking about keep hope alive. I mean, we can't leave here without hearing that. You know, it's just like, that's like having, you know, peanut butter without the jelly or something. And it will lift your soul. I promise you. I promise you. But again, I want to thank Dr. Smith. He is, you know, he's attending to his wife who is ill, so he took the time to be here. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. I thank you. I thank our staff, our communications department, and everybody, you know, because you see me, but what you don't see is all the work that goes on behind the scenes to make this happen. So thank all of you. I love you, really, truly. So what's going to happen is Reverend Damien here? Is Reverend Damien on? There he is. Hi. I was going to do the tease for April, but do you want to do it? Can you hear me?
I can say something. You can say something, and then I can say something very briefly.
Okay. So in April, you know, when we had the libation ritual at the conference, people were amazed, they were fascinated, but they didn't know what was going on. So what we're going to do is have Reverend Gilbert Kobina Beaufair. Is how we pronounce his name?
Bohari, I think is how you pronounce it.
He's the founder of Godbox, and he's the person who was doing the libation ritual. And we think it's very important for everybody to understand what's going on, because you did have questions, and it was new for us to see. And so Reverend Damien and Reverend Gilbert are going to be on our critical conversation the third Monday of April. Amen. So I wanted to tell you that. Now, Reverend Dare.
I just wanted to say again, thank you, Reverend Sue. And then thank you, of course, Dr. Smith, again, for joining us and sharing. We continue to lift up the text. I was talking about prophetic remembering last week, but each week it may be a different spiritual practice. But I think the book continues to serve as a significant and relevant testament of the Thurman outer life, inner sanctuary work that becomes critical in general for living, but obviously in the times in which we live. So thank you so much for offering us continued perspective on the work of hope, and then the ways in which we have been observers and recipients of that hope, and giving us, I think, a frame to look at it through. And I think the book, last thing I'll say, I think the book is important because the book does not just talk about these practices as theoretical, theological, and or philosophical truths, but they are looked at in the lives of people as they embody those particular practices. So I think that that's another unique and significant value add of the text, is as you offer what these practices are, it is looking at the ways in which, as you yourself, right, talk about your own theological landscape being expanded in different ways, but then also how has that looked and how has that shown up in the lives of other people who've sought to live their outer life from the inner sanctuary a specific way. So just again, fruitful, and we'll be sharing some more as we meet tomorrow as a staff. But thank everyone again for joining us on tonight, and thank our wonderful team and facilitator.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Durr.
Dr. Iva Carruthers was on there. Are you still on, Dr. Iva? Is there anything that you want to say before we sign out? You're muted. You're muted.
Yes, I'm still here, and I want to extend my gratitude and our gratitude as well, Dr. Smith. It is wonderful that you have shared this time, and my takeaway is grounded in how Alan Buzak reminds us about holy rage. And the power, as you've talked about, the intersectionality of love and forgiveness, but certainly what I associate most with Reverend Jesse Jackson is beyond audacity to temerity. And it's the kind of temerity that represents the daughters of hope, which is courage and anger. And so that holy rage, I think, is what you're helping us to struggle with. And so I thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Carruthers. So now all of you who are here with us, I want you to, we're going to sign off, but we're going to play a clip of Reverend Jackson. And I ask you to just listen to it because I think it will leave you inspired. I think that what we had in the course of this conversation was inspiring, But I think hearing the words of the man who said, keep hope alive, will make you leave this conversation with a smile on your face and hope in your heart. So can we pull the clip up, please?
I wasn't always on television. Writers were not always outside my door. When I was born late one afternoon, October 8th, in Greenville, South Carolina, no writers asked my mother her name. Nobody chose to write down our address. A mama was not supposed to make it, and I was not supposed to make it. You see, I was born a teenage mother who was born a teenage mother. I understand. I know abandonment and people being mean to you and saying you're nothing and nobody and can never be anything. I understand. Jesse Jackson is my third name. I'm adopted. When I had no name, my grandmother gave me her name. My name was Jesse Burns till I was 12. So I wouldn't have a blank space. She gave me a name to hold me over. I understand when nobody knows your name. I understand when you have no name. I understand. I wasn't born in the hospital. Mama didn't have insurance. I was born in the bed at house. I really do understand. Born in a 3-room house, bathroom in the backyard, slop job by the bed, no hot and cold running water. I understand. Wallpaper used for decoration? No, for a windbreaker. I understand. I'm a working person's person. That's why I understand you, whether you're black or white. I understand work. I was not born with a silver spoon in my mouth. I had a shovel programmed for my hand. My mother, a working woman. So many days she went to work early, with runs in her stockings. She knew better, but she rolled runs in her stockings so that my brother and I could have matching socks and not be laughed at school. I understand. At 3 o'clock on Thanksgiving Day, we couldn't eat turkey because Mama was preparing somebody else's turkey at 3 o'clock. We had to play football to entertain ourselves. And then around 6 o'clock, she would get off the Alta Vista bus and we would bring up the leftovers and eat our turkey, leftovers, the caucus, the cranberries, around 8 o'clock at night. I really do understand. Every one of these funny labels they put on you, those of you who are watching this broadcast tonight in the projects, on the corners, I understand. Call you outcast, low down, you can't make it, you're nothing, you're from nobody, subclass, underclass. When you see Jesse Jackson, when my name goes in nomination, your name goes in nomination. I was born in the slum, but the slum was not born in me. And it wasn't born in you, and you can make it. Wherever you are tonight, you can make it. Hold your head high. Stick your chest out. You can make it. It gets dark sometimes, but the morning comes. Don't you surrender. Suffering breeds character. Character breeds faith. In the end, faith will not disappoint. You must not surrender. You may or may not get there, but just know that you're qualified and you hold on and hold out. We must never surrender. America will get better and better. Keep hope alive.
And with that, I just say amen and good night. Thank all of you for being here. Thank you, Dr. Smith. And we'll see all of you guys at our next critical conversation, the third Monday of April. God bless and take good care. Bye-bye.